The sound of a violin echoed through a crowded Chicago street corner, its melancholic melody weaving through the blaring car horns and the hurried footsteps of passers-by. Dominic Castellano stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, not out of curiosity about a street child, but because the music was far too familiar. It was Ave Maria, the violin piece his wife used to play every night before sleep, the song that had filled their wedding ceremony 8 years ago, the song he thought had been buried with her in a cold grave. He turned around and saw a little girl about 7 years old, her body thin as a twig, her clothes torn and filthy, her small but skilled hands gliding across a cracked, worn-out violin. In front of her sat a soggy cardboard box with a few scattered coins rolling inside. But it was not the music that made Dominic's heart stop. It was the heart-shaped necklace swaying on the girl's chest under the flickering streetlight. The silver had tarnished with time, but he recognized it immediately. He had placed that very necklace around his wife's neck on their wedding night, when he swore to protect her for the rest of his life. The girl stopped playing and looked up. Her clear blue eyes stared directly into his without blinking. Eyes that carried the exact same color he saw in his mirror every morning. Her gaze held no fear, no begging, but something far deeper, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire short life. "Are you my daddy?" Dominic stood frozen in place, the world around him grinding to a halt. The most powerful mafia boss in Chicago, the man the entire city feared, now trembled before the question of a 7-year-old street child. His wife had died 8 years ago. His family had told him so. He had believed it. So why was that necklace here? Why did this child have eyes identical to his down to the last millimeter? And why was his heart pounding wildly in his chest, as if screaming that everything he had believed for the past 8 years was nothing but a lie? Dominic did not answer her question. His throat tightened, his mind racing through 1,000 possibilities, none of which made any sense. He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to eye level with the girl, and asked in a voice rougher than he intended, "Who is your mother? Where is she?" The little girl's eyes widened with desperation. She clutched her violin tighter against her chest, her tiny knuckles turning white. "Mommy is very sick. She is dying. Please, mister, you have to save her." The words hit Dominic like a punch to the gut. Dying. The girl spoke of death as casually as other children spoke of homework or playtime. There was no dramatics in her voice, only a cold, terrified certainty that told him she had seen too much suffering for someone her age. He stood up abruptly, pulling out his phone. His driver answered on the first ring. "Stay where you are. I will call when I need you." He did not wait for a response before ending the call. Looking down at the girl, he nodded once. "Take me to her." The girl turned and ran. She moved with the speed and agility of someone who had spent her entire life navigating dangerous streets, dodging between trash cans and broken fences without hesitation. Dominic followed, his polished leather shoes splashing through puddles of filthy water, his tailored coat brushing against grimy walls. They descended deeper into Southside, the most dangerous neighborhood in Chicago. The streetlights grew sparse, then disappeared entirely. The air thickened with the stench of rotting garbage and human waste. Needles littered the cracked pavement. Shadows moved in doorways, watching. Dominic felt eyes on him from every direction. He knew this place by reputation, had ordered operations here, had sent men to collect debts from these very streets, but he had never walked them himself. The powerful did not come to places like this. The powerful sent others. Yet here he was, following a 7-year-old girl through hell. The residents recognized him. Of course they did. His face was known throughout the city, whispered about in fear and respect. One by one, they shrank back into their shadows, pressing themselves against walls, avoiding his gaze. A group of young men who had been loitering at a corner scattered like cockroaches when light hits them. Nobody stopped him. Nobody dared. Lily ran faster, glancing back occasionally to make sure he was still following. Her bare feet slapped against the wet concrete, leaving small footprints that disappeared almost instantly in the grime. Finally, she stopped at the end of a narrow alley. Before them stood a door made of rotting wood, barely hanging on its rusted hinges. The building behind it looked abandoned, condemned, forgotten by the world. Lily turned to face him, her blue eyes, so painfully similar to his own, filled with a desperate plea. "Mommy is inside. Please, mister. Please do not leave." Dominic looked at the door, then back at the child. Everything in his training told him this could be a trap. He had enemies everywhere. Walking into an unknown building in hostile territory was suicide. But those eyes, that necklace, that song. He reached out and pushed the door open. The hinges screamed in protest as darkness swallowed the entrance. And then the smell hit him. A smell he knew all too well from his years in this brutal business. The smell of sickness, the smell of a body giving up, the smell of death waiting patiently in the corner. Dominic stepped inside, and the door groaned shut behind him. The room was drowning in darkness. Only a single candle flickered weakly in the corner, its dying flame casting trembling shadows across the crumbling walls. Dominic stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the blackness, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun concealed beneath his coat. Then he saw her. On a filthy mattress in the far corner lay a woman so thin she looked like a skeleton wrapped in paper. Her arms were nothing but bones covered in pale, almost translucent skin. Her cheeks had sunken so deeply that the outline of her skull was visible beneath her flesh. A ragged blanket covered her frail body, rising and falling with each shallow, labored breath. Dominic stepped closer, his heart pounding so violently he could hear it echoing in his ears. The floorboards creaked under his weight, disturbing the heavy silence of the room. The candlelight danced, throwing shifting patterns across the woman's face, and then the flame steadied, illuminating her features clearly for the first time. Dominic's legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed to his knees beside the mattress, his breath escaping his lungs in a strangled gasp. His hands gripped the edge of the dirty fabric as if it were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. It was Serena. His wife. The woman he had loved more than his own life. The woman he had mourned for 8 agonizing years. The woman whose grave he had visited every single month, laying flowers on cold stone, speaking to a ghost who never answered. She was here, alive, barely, but alive. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, as if the simple act of lifting her eyelids required all the strength she had left. Those eyes, once bright and full of laughter, now looked hollow and exhausted. But when they focused on his face, something sparked within them. Recognition, disbelief, and then tears. "You," she whispered, her voice so weak it was barely audible. "You finally came." Dominic reached out with trembling hands and touched her face. Her skin was cold, too cold for someone still breathing. He could feel every bone in her cheek beneath his fingertips. This was not the woman he remembered. This was a shadow, a ghost of who she used to be. "Serena," he choked out, her name tasting foreign on his tongue after years of only speaking it to tombstones. "Serena, how is this possible?" She did not answer. She did not have the strength. Instead, she simply lifted her hand, her fingers trembling violently with the effort, and placed it against his cheek. A tear slid down her sunken face, leaving a trail through the grime on her skin. In the corner of the room, Lily stood motionless, clutching her violin against her chest like a shield. She watched them in silence, her young eyes carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed too much suffering, too much pain, too much of the cruel reality that life had offered her. Dominic looked around the room for the first time. No electricity, no running water. A few pieces of torn clothing hung on a rusty nail. A pot sat in the corner, filled with rice so old and hard it had turned to stone. This was not a home. This was a tomb for the living. He turned back to Serena, gathering her gently into his arms, terrified that she might shatter if he held her too tightly. "I thought you were dead," he whispered, his voice breaking completely. "They told me you died in a car accident. They showed me documents, death certificates, everything. I believed them for 8 years. Serena, 8 years." Dominic did not waste another second. He scooped Serena into his arms and rose to his feet, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of glass. She weighed almost nothing, lighter than the coat on his back, lighter than the guilt that had already begun clawing at his heart. "Hold on," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm getting you out of here." He moved quickly through the rotting doorway, back into the narrow alley, his expensive shoes pounding against the filthy ground. Behind him, he heard the rapid patter of small feet. Lily was following, her violin clutched tightly in her arms, her eyes fixed on her mother's pale face. Dominic pulled out his phone with one hand while balancing Serena with the other. He dialed Tony, his most trusted man, his voice sharp and commanding. "Prepare the VIP suite at St. Mary Hospital. Right now. I do not care what it takes. Have the best doctors waiting. Ask no questions." He hung up before Tony could respond. The black sedan was waiting exactly where he had left it. His driver jumped out immediately, eyes widening at the sight of his boss carrying a skeletal woman through the slums. But the man knew better than to ask questions. He simply opened the back door and stepped aside. Dominic slid into the back seat with Serena still in his arms. Lily climbed in from the other side, pressing herself into the corner, her small body trembling but her eyes dry. She had learned long ago that crying solved nothing. "Drive," Dominic ordered. "Faster than you have ever driven in your life." The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. In his arms, Serena stirred. Her hand moved weakly, searching until it found his. Her fingers, cold and fragile, wrapped around his with what little strength she had left. "The girl," she breathed, each word costing her visible effort. "Lily, she is yours, Dominic. She is your daughter." Dominic looked up at the rearview mirror. Lily sat motionless, staring back at him with those unmistakable blue eyes. His eyes, the same shade, the same shape, the same depth. There was no question anymore. There never really had been. The hospital doors burst open as they arrived. Nurses and doctors swarmed the entrance, a gurney already waiting. Tony stood to the side, his face a mask of controlled shock as he watched his boss emerge from the car carrying a woman who looked more dead than alive. They took Serena from his arms and rushed her inside. Dominic followed closely, Lily running beside him, her bare feet slapping against the cold hospital floor. Nobody stopped her. Nobody dared stop either of them. Minutes felt like hours as doctors worked behind closed doors. Dominic stood in the hallway, his shirt stained with grime from the slum, his hands still trembling from carrying his wife's broken body. Finally, a doctor emerged, his face grave. "Mr. Castellano, I need to speak with you privately." They stepped aside, away from Lily, who sat on a plastic chair, hugging her violin, her eyes never leaving the emergency room door. "She has severe pneumonia, advanced malnutrition, chronic anemia, and early-stage heart failure," the doctor said quietly. "Frankly, the fact that she is still alive is nothing short of a miracle. Her body has been fighting for far too long with nothing to sustain it." Dominic absorbed each word like a bullet to the chest. He turned and looked at Lily, so small and so still. Then he looked at the door behind which Serena lay, fighting for her life. "This child," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "She really is my daughter. And someone stole 8 years from us." Hours passed before a nurse finally emerged to inform Dominic that Serena had been moved to the intensive care unit. Her condition was stable for now, but she remained unconscious, her body too exhausted to wake. Dominic sat in the waiting room, still wearing his stained shirt, still carrying the smell of that rotting slum on his skin. Beside him, Lily perched on the edge of a plastic chair, her violin resting across her lap like a sleeping child. She had not spoken since they arrived. He studied her profile in the harsh hospital light, the sharp cheekbones that should have been round with childhood fat, the dark circles beneath eyes far too old for her age, the way she held herself perfectly still, as if she had learned that making herself small and invisible was the safest way to exist. "Lily," he said softly, testing the name on his tongue. "That is your name, right?" She nodded without looking at him. "How old are you?" 7. 7 years. 7 years of her life that he had missed completely. 7 years of birthdays, first words, first steps, all stolen from him by someone he had trusted. "Can you tell me?" He paused, unsure how to ask a child about horrors no child should know. "Can you tell me about your life? About you and your mother?" Lily was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice completely devoid of emotion, she began to speak. "We lived in many places, first in an old car behind a factory, then under a bridge when winter came. The car was too cold. Mommy got sick that time, but she got better." She spoke as if reciting a grocery list, facts without feelings, memories stripped of their pain. "One time we had a room in a building, but the man who owned it wanted money we did not have. He threw us out in the rain. Mommy carried me all night. Her shoes broke, but she kept walking." Dominic's hands curled into fists on his knees. "There were bad men once. They grabbed Mommy and me. They said they would sell us. But Mommy bit one of them and we ran. We hid in a dumpster for 2 days. We did not eat anything." Her voice remained flat, mechanical. This was simply her life. She knew nothing else. "Mommy taught me violin when I was 4. She said it was the only thing she had left from before. I started playing on the street when I was 5. Sometimes people gave money, sometimes they gave food, sometimes they gave nothing." She paused, her small fingers tracing the strings of her instrument. "Some days we ate once. Some weeks we did not eat at all. Mommy always gave me her food. She said she was not hungry, but I knew she was lying. That is why she got so sick." Dominic could not breathe. Each word was a knife twisting deeper into his chest. "Mommy never said bad things about you," Lily continued quietly. "She said you were not a bad person. She said you just did not know. She told me if I ever found you, I should not be angry." She finally turned to look at him, her blue eyes meeting his. "I am not angry." Dominic's nails dug into his palms so hard he felt skin break and blood seep through his fingers. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice barely controlled. "Who forced your mother to leave? Who made you live like this?" Lily did not answer his question. She simply looked down at her violin, her small fingers running along its worn surface. Perhaps she did not know. Perhaps Serena had protected her from that truth as well. Dominic did not push further. Instead, he arranged for a nurse to stay with Lily in a private room adjacent to Serena's. He watched as the girl curled up on the hospital bed, still clutching her instrument, her eyes finally closing from exhaustion. Then he left. It was well past midnight when Dominic arrived at his mansion. The sprawling estate sat dark and silent, its grandeur feeling hollow for the first time in years. He did not turn on any lights. He simply walked through the marble foyer, past the priceless paintings and crystal chandeliers, and sank into a leather chair in his study. Darkness surrounded him, silence pressed against his ears, and memories he had buried long ago began clawing their way back to the surface. 8 years ago, he had been in Italy, handling a delicate business matter that required his personal attention. The call had come in the middle of the night, Victor's voice on the other end, heavy with what sounded like grief. "Dominic, there has been an accident. Serena, she lost control of her car, hit a power pole. The car caught fire. By the time they found her, his brother had paused, letting the implication hang in the air. She is gone, Dominic. I am so sorry." Then Elena, his stepmother, had taken over the arrangements. She had handled everything while Dominic remained overseas, paralyzed by shock and grief. By the time he returned to Chicago, the funeral had already taken place. The casket had been closed, they told him, because there was nothing left to identify. Her ashes had been scattered in Lake Michigan, per her supposed wishes. He had never questioned it. Why would he? They were his family, his blood. His trust in them had been absolute. But now, sitting alone in the darkness, the pieces began shifting into a different pattern. Why had he never seen the body? Why had the funeral been arranged so quickly, before he could even return? Why had Elena insisted on handling everything personally? Why had Victor been so eager to close the chapter and move forward? Dominic reached for his phone. His fingers moved automatically, dialing Tony's number. "Boss?" Tony's voice was alert despite the late hour. "I need you to find everything about Serena's accident 8 years ago," Dominic said, his voice flat and cold. "Every document, every police report, every witness. I want to know who signed what, who saw what, and who was paid to look the other way." "Understood. I will start immediately." Dominic hung up without another word. His phone buzzed again almost instantly. Catherine's name flashed across the screen. She had been calling all evening, her messages growing increasingly frantic. "Where are you? Why are you not answering? Who is that woman at the hospital?" He silenced the phone and set it face down on the desk. In the suffocating darkness of his study, Dominic Castellano sat perfectly still. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the silence like a blade forged in ice. If Serena never died, then who orchestrated all of this? Victor? Elena? Or both of them together? Dominic did not sleep that night. By the time dawn broke over Chicago, he was already in his car, driving back toward Southside. He needed to retrieve whatever belongings Lily and Serena had left behind. More importantly, he needed answers that the hospital room could not provide. The slum looked different in daylight, though no less miserable. The filth and decay were simply more visible now, the poverty more stark under the pale morning sun. Dominic walked through the narrow alley alone, his bodyguard stationed at the entrance per his orders. This was something he needed to do himself. The rotting door still hung open from the night before. He stepped inside, the smell less overwhelming now that his senses had already been assaulted once. The candle had burned out completely, leaving only a pool of hardened wax on the concrete floor. Dominic looked around the tiny space, searching for anything worth saving. A few pieces of clothing hung on a rusty nail. A cracked plastic bowl sat in the corner. The violin case, worn and battered, leaned against the wall. He gathered everything into a bag, moving methodically through the room. Then, as he lifted the stained mattress to check beneath it, his hand touched something solid. A small notebook, its cover faded and water-damaged, had been hidden underneath. Dominic pulled it out carefully, brushing off the dust. The pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with handwriting he recognized immediately. Serena's handwriting. His hands trembled as he opened the first page. The date written at the top was from 8 years ago, just days after she had supposedly died. "They came for me today. Victor and Elena. They said if I ever showed my face again, Dominic would have an accident. They said they would kill him and make it look like business. I have no choice. I have to disappear. For him. For my baby. Dominic's blood turned to ice. He turned the page, then another, then another. Each entry was worse than the last. They send someone to check on me every month. A man in a black car. He watches from across the street. If I try to run, they will know. I gave birth alone in a free clinic. No documents. No birth certificate. They cannot know Lily exists. The money ran out again. We ate from garbage cans this week, but we are alive. That is enough. The pages blurred as Dominic read faster, desperate and horrified. Every entry mentioned V and E. Every page dripped with fear and desperation. His wife had lived in terror for 8 years, hunted like an animal by his own family. Then he reached an entry near the middle of the notebook, and his entire world shattered. They took Lucas the moment he was born. My son. My baby boy. I only saw his face for a few seconds before they ripped him from my arms. They said he would be better off dead than with me. I do not know if he is alive. I do not know where they took him. I cannot even search for him because they are always watching. Dominic read the words again, and again, and again. Lucas, his son. Twins. Serena gave birth to twins? He whispered, his voice cracking. I have a son? Where is he? What did they do with my son? Dominic drove back to the hospital in a blur of rage and disbelief. The notebook sat on the passenger seat beside him, its faded pages containing secrets that had rewritten everything he thought he knew about his life. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his mind spinning with questions that demanded immediate answers. When he burst through the door of Serena's hospital room, she was awake, propped up against pillows, an IV dripping fluid into her thin arm. She looked fragile but alert. Her eyes met his, and in them he saw something he had not noticed before. Fear, guilt, and a heavy resignation, as if she had been waiting for this moment for 8 long years. Lily sat in a chair beside the bed, her violin resting across her knees. She looked up at Dominic with wide eyes, sensing the tension crackling in the air. Dominic held up the notebook, his hand shaking. Tell me about Lucas. Serena closed her eyes. A single tear escaped down her cheek. You found it, she whispered. Tell me everything. Now. She took a shaky breath, her frail chest rising and falling with effort. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I was pregnant with twins. I found out after you left for Italy. I was so happy, Dominic. I wanted to surprise you when you came back. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. But Victor found out first. He and Elena came to me one night. They said I was a threat to the family. They said my father had been an enemy of the Castellano family years ago, and my blood could never mix with theirs. They said if I did not disappear, you would have an accident. A permanent one. Dominic's jaw tightened until he thought his teeth might crack. I was terrified, Serena continued. Not for myself. For you. They made it very clear they had the power to kill you and make it look like business. So I agreed to leave. I thought I was protecting you. She paused, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I went into labor early. The stress was too much. I gave birth in an abandoned building with only a midwife they had paid off. Lucas came first. He was so small, so perfect. I held him for maybe 10 seconds before they took him from me. Her voice broke completely. They said he would be disposed of. Those were their exact words. Disposed of. Like garbage. I screamed. I begged. But they held me down. Then Lily came. She was even smaller, barely breathing. They thought she would die, so they left her with me. They did not think she was worth the trouble. Dominic felt something inside him snap. His vision blurred red. I ran with Lily as soon as I could move. Serena finished. I have been hiding ever since. I wanted to find Lucas. I tried so many times, but they were always watching. I could not risk leading them to Lily. Lily sat frozen, her small face pale with shock. She was learning for the first time that somewhere in the world, she had a brother. Dominic stood slowly, his eyes blazing with a fury that could burn cities to the ground. My son. Where is he? Who took him? Within hours, Dominic had transformed the back office of his legitimate business front into a war room. Maps covered the walls, computers hummed with activity, and his most trusted men gathered around a long table, their faces grim as they awaited orders. Tony stood at the head of the group, his expression darker than Dominic had ever seen it. He had worked for the Castellano family for over 15 years, and not once had he seen his boss this close to losing control. I want everything, Dominic said, his voice deceptively calm. Every hospital record from 8 years ago. Every financial transaction made by Victor and Elena during that period. Every piece of paper that has their fingerprints on it. Find it all. The team dispersed immediately. Each man assigned a specific task. Phones rang. Keyboards clattered. Within the underground network of Chicago, favors were called in and debts were collected. By nightfall, the first pieces of evidence began trickling in. Tony approached Dominic with a folder, his jaw tight. We found divorce papers filed 8 years ago. Your signature is on them. Dominic snatched the folder and examined the document. His blood ran cold. I never signed this. I never even knew these existed. The signature is a forgery, Tony confirmed. A good one, but not perfect. Our handwriting expert already verified it. The next discovery came an hour later. Hospital records from a small clinic on the outskirts of the city showed that a woman matching Serena's description had given birth to twins on the night in question. But only one child, a girl, had been registered. The second baby, a boy, had no birth certificate, no medical record, nothing to prove he had ever existed. Someone erased him, Dominic muttered. There is more, Tony said. Marcus Webb, the family lawyer, handled all the paperwork during that time. Death certificate, funeral arrangements, everything. And on the exact day Serena gave birth, he received a payment of $200,000 from an offshore account linked to Victor. Dominic's hands curled into fists. What about the boy? Where did they take him? Tony hesitated before answering. We found a transfer document. A newborn male was handed over to a charity organization the day after he was born. But when we traced the address, it does not exist. The charity is a shell company. Before Dominic could respond, the office door burst open. Catherine stormed in, her designer heels clicking against the floor, her face flushed with anger. Where have you been? She demanded. You disappeared for days without a word. You ignore my calls. You treat me like I do not exist. What is going on, Dominic? He looked at her with eyes so cold she actually stepped backward. Get out. Excuse me? I said get out. We are done. Leave now before I have someone remove you. Catherine's mouth opened and closed in shock. For a moment she looked ready to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. Without another word, she turned and fled. Tony waited until the door closed before speaking again. Boss, there is one more thing. We traced the shell company to an orphanage on the outskirts of Chicago, Street Francis Home for Children, and we found this. He handed Dominic a photograph. A young boy, approximately 7 years old, stared back at him from the image. His hair was dark and unkempt. His clothes were plain and worn, but his eyes, those unmistakable blue eyes, were identical to Dominic's own, and his face, thin and serious, looked exactly like Lily, like looking at the same child twice. The photograph burned in Dominic's pocket as he returned to the hospital that evening. Every instinct screamed at him to drive straight to Street Francis and tear the building apart until he found his son. But Tony had advised caution. They needed confirmation first. They needed a plan. So, Dominic waited, and waiting had never felt more like torture. Serena was asleep when he arrived, her breathing steadier than before, color slowly returning to her hollow cheeks. The doctors said she was improving, though recovery would take months. Her body had been pushed beyond its limits for far too long. Dominic found Lily sitting alone in the hallway outside the room. She had claimed a small corner near the window, her violin case open beside her. She was not playing, just staring at the instrument with an expression that seemed far too heavy for a child her age. He sat down next to her, the plastic chair creaking under his weight. You can play if you want, he said quietly. I do not mind. Lily looked up at him with those striking blue eyes, so much like his own that it still startled him every time. I feel strange when I do not play, she admitted, like something is missing inside me. Then play. She hesitated for only a moment before lifting the violin to her shoulder. Her small fingers found their positions automatically, muscle memory guiding her through movements she had repeated thousands of times on cold street corners and in damp alleyways. The first notes of Ave Maria filled the hospital corridor. Dominic felt his chest tighten. It was the same melody that had stopped him on that busy street, the same song that had played at his wedding, the same tune Serena used to hum while cooking dinner in their kitchen a lifetime ago. Tears spilled down his cheeks before he could stop them. He had not cried in years. He had forgotten he was even capable of it. But sitting here, listening to his daughter play the song that represented everything he had lost and everything he was only now beginning to find again, he could not hold back. Lily finished the piece and lowered her bow. She looked at him curiously. Mommy taught me this song first, she said. She said it would keep a piece of you with us. Every time I played it, she would cry. I never understood why until now. Dominic reached out and pulled her into his arms. She stiffened briefly, unaccustomed to physical affection, then slowly relaxed against his chest. He held her carefully, afraid she might break, afraid this might all still be a dream. "Will you stay with us?" Lily whispered against his shirt. "Mommy waited for you for so long. Please do not leave again." "I am not going anywhere," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "Never again. I swear it." They sat together in silence until footsteps approached. An elderly woman with kind eyes and worn hands appeared, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Mrs. Rosa," Lily said, recognizing her immediately. The old woman smiled warmly at the girl before turning to study Dominic with open curiosity. "So you are the father," she said. "I wondered if you would ever come." She sat down beside them, placing the basket of food on the floor. "I helped them when I could," Mrs. Rosa continued. "Not enough, but what little I had. That child there played her violin every day, rain or shine. Reminded me of an angel." She paused, her brow furrowing as if remembering something. "Strange thing, though. A few months ago, I visited my sister near Street Francis Orphanage. I saw a boy there who looked exactly like Lily. Same face, same blue eyes. Could have been her twin. I thought my old eyes were playing tricks on me." Mrs. Rosa's words echoed in Dominic's mind long after she had left. The same face, the same blue eyes. Could have been her twin. The confirmation he had been seeking had come from the most unexpected source. The next morning, Dominic drove to Street Francis Home for Children alone. He had ordered Tony to stay behind, to continue gathering evidence against Victor and Elena. This was something he needed to do himself. This was personal. The orphanage was a gray, weathered building on the outskirts of the city, paint peeled from its walls. The playground equipment was rusted and broken. Children in faded clothes wandered the yard with hollow expressions, their laughter absent, their hope long extinguished. Dominic walked through the front entrance, his presence immediately drawing nervous glances from the staff. They knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew who he was, and no one dared question why the most powerful mafia boss in the city had suddenly appeared at their doorstep. The director, a thin woman with gray hair pulled into a severe bun, met him in her cramped office. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a filing cabinet drawer. "The boy you are asking about," she said, her voice shaking. "His name here is Luke. He arrived 7 years ago. No birth certificate, no medical records, nothing." She handed Dominic a thin folder. He opened it, scanning the sparse documentation inside. "It says here he was donated by an anonymous family," Dominic said, his voice dangerously quiet, "along with a large financial contribution." The director nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "What else?" "He was adopted once, 2 years ago. A family took him in." She hesitated, wringing her hands. "They returned him after 8 months. Said he was difficult, unmanageable." Dominic's eyes narrowed. "What really happened?" The woman swallowed hard. "We found bruises, old ones, new ones. The father was not a kind man. Luke stopped speaking for months after he came back. He does not trust anyone now. He barely eats. He never plays with the other children." Dominic felt rage building in his chest, hot and suffocating. His son had been stolen from his mother, abandoned in this miserable place, and then tortured by strangers who were supposed to protect him. "Take me to him." The director led him through a narrow corridor and out into the dusty yard. She pointed toward a far corner, where a single child sat alone beneath a dead tree. Dominic walked slowly across the yard, each step feeling heavier than the last. The other children scattered as he approached, sensing danger in his presence. But the boy under the tree did not move. He simply sat with his knees pulled to his chest, staring at the ground. When Dominic was close enough to see his face clearly, his heart stopped. It was like looking at Lily. The same sharp cheekbones, the same dark hair, the same thin frame. And when the boy finally lifted his head, those eyes, those unmistakable blue eyes, stared back at him with cold suspicion. "Who are you?" the boy asked, his voice flat and guarded. "What do you want from me?" Dominic knelt down slowly, bringing himself to the child's level. His throat tightened, his hands shook. When he spoke, his voice cracked in a way it had not done since he was a child himself. "Your real name is Lucas. Your mother has been searching for you for 7 years, and I am your father." Luke's reaction was immediate and violent. He scrambled backward, his small body pressing against the rough bark of the dead tree, his eyes blazing with distrust and anger. "Liar," he spat. "I do not have parents. Everyone who says they want me, just wants to hurt me. Go away. Leave me alone." Dominic did not move. He had expected this. A child who had been abandoned, abused, and betrayed would not simply accept a stranger's words, no matter how true they were. Slowly, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture Tony had taken at the hospital just yesterday. Serena, lying in her bed, thin but alive, and beside her, Lily, holding her violin, her blue eyes looking directly at the camera. "Look at this," Dominic said quietly, holding the photo out. "Just look." Luke hesitated. His eyes darted between Dominic's face and the photograph, suspicion written in every line of his young body. But curiosity won. He snatched the picture from Dominic's hand and stared at it. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his hands began to tremble. The girl in the photo had his face, not similar, not close, identical. The same eyes, the same nose, the same shape of the lips. It was like looking into a mirror that showed him as someone else. "Who?" Luke's voice cracked. "Who is she?" "Her name is Lily. She is your twin sister, and the woman beside her is your mother. She has been searching for you since the day you were taken from her." Luke's grip on the photograph tightened until the edges crumpled. He did not speak, but his eyes never left the image. "Come with me," Dominic said gently. "Come see them. If you decide I am lying, I will bring you back here myself. But at least give them a chance. Give yourself a chance." The drive to the hospital was silent. Luke sat in the back seat, pressed against the door, as far from Dominic as possible. He still clutched the photograph in his hands, staring at it as if it might disappear. When they arrived at Serena's room, Lily was sitting beside the bed, reading aloud from a picture book one of the nurses had given her. She looked up as the door opened, and her words died in her throat. Luke stood frozen in the doorway. Lily rose slowly from her chair. The two children stared at each other across the small room, neither moving, neither breathing. It was like watching one person split into two reflections. Serena stirred at the sudden silence. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they landed on the boy standing at the entrance. A sound escaped her lips, something between a gasp and a sob. "Lucas," she breathed. "My baby. My son." She tried to sit up, her arms reaching out despite her weakness. Tears poured down her face. 8 years of grief and longing breaking free all at once. Luke took one step forward, then another. His walls were crumbling, his defenses failing against the desperate love radiating from the frail woman on the bed. Are you really my mother?" he whispered. "Yes," Serena sobbed. "Yes, my darling. I have been looking for you every single day." Lily moved then, crossing the room to stand beside her brother. She reached out and took his hand in hers. "I am Lily," she said softly. "I am your twin sister. We have the same eyes. See?" Luke looked at her hand holding his, then at her face, then at Serena, and for the first time in years, the boy who had forgotten how to feel allowed himself to cry. The four of them came together on the hospital bed, arms wrapped around each other, tears mixing with laughter, broken pieces finally beginning to fit. But in Dominic's pocket, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and felt his blood turn to ice. A message from Victor. "I hear you have been spending a lot of time at Street Mary Hospital lately. Is something wrong, little brother?" Dominic stared at the message on his phone, his jaw tightening. Victor knew, or at least, Victor suspected. Either way, the element of surprise was slipping away. He stepped out of the hospital room, leaving Serena and the children in their fragile reunion, and immediately called Tony. "Double the security at Street Mary. No one gets in without my explicit approval. And find out who has been watching this hospital." "Already on it, boss. We caught one of Victor's men lurking in the parking garage an hour ago. He has been reporting back everything." Dominic cursed under his breath. Catherine. It had to be her. She must have run straight to Victor after he threw her out, eager to trade information for favor. "There is more," Tony continued. "Victor just left the family estate. He is heading your way." Dominic ended the call and returned to the room. He moved the children away from the bed gently, positioning himself near the door. Serena watched him with frightened eyes. She knew. She had always known. 20 minutes later, Victor Castellano swept into the hospital corridor like he owned the building. He was impeccably dressed as always, his silver hair slicked back, his smile wide and warm, the perfect image of a concerned older brother. "Dominic!" he exclaimed, spreading his arms as he approached. "I heard you were here, and came immediately. What is wrong? Are you sick? Is there anything I can?" He stopped mid-sentence as he reached the doorway and saw inside the room. Serena lay on the bed, thin and pale but unmistakably alive. Beside her sat two children with identical blue eyes, the same blue eyes that marked every Castellano by blood. For one brief second, Victor's mask slipped. His face went white, his eyes widened with shock and something darker. Fear, perhaps, or fury. Then, just as quickly, the mask returned. "Serena?" he gasped, rushing forward with exaggerated emotion. "My God, Serena, is it really you? We thought you were dead. This is a miracle." He reached for her hand, but Serena recoiled, pressing herself against the pillows, her body trembling. Victor pretended not to notice. "Why did no one tell me?" he continued, turning to Dominic with wounded eyes. "We are family. I should have been informed. I could have helped. I can still help. Let me arrange for her to be transferred to the family estate. We have the best doctors. The best— No." Dominic's voice cut through the performance like a blade. "I will handle everything myself. Serena stays here, under my protection." Victor blinked, his smile faltering for just a moment. Of course, whatever you think is best. I only want to help, little brother. You know that." He lingered for a few more minutes, asking questions neither Dominic nor Serena answered, before finally taking his leave with promises to return soon. The moment the door closed behind him, Serena grabbed Dominic's arm. "It was him," she whispered, her voice shaking violently. "He was the one who came to me that night. He held a gun to my stomach and told me he would kill you if I did not disappear. He took Lucas from my arms. It was Victor. It was always Victor." Dominic said nothing. He simply kissed her forehead and walked out of the room. Outside the hospital, Victor climbed into his black sedan and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, dialing a number he knew by heart. "Marcus," he said, his voice cold and sharp. "We have a problem. She is alive. And he found the boy too. Clean this up before it destroys everything. Do whatever it takes." Dominic did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his study while Tony and his team worked through the darkness, tearing apart every digital footprint Victor and Marcus had left behind. By dawn, they had found everything. Tony placed a thick folder on Dominic's desk, his face grim. "We cracked Marcus Webb's personal server. The man kept records of everything, probably as insurance in case Victor ever turned on him." Dominic opened the folder. Inside were documents that made his blood boil with every page he turned. A contract dated 8 years ago, outlining the removal and permanent disappearance of Serena Castellano. Victor's signature sat at the bottom, bold and unmistakable. Bank statements showing $200,000 transferred from Victor's offshore account to Marcus Webb on the day Serena gave birth. Medical records from the clinic, altered to show only one child born instead of 2. And then, the worst of it all. Tony handed him a small recording device. This was stored in an encrypted file, a conversation between Victor and Elena from 8 years ago. Dominic pressed play. Victor's voice filled the room, cold and calculating. "That woman knows too much about our money laundering operations. She has seen the books. She could destroy everything we have built. She has to disappear." Elena's response came next, equally chilling. "And if she gives birth to that child, there will be an heir competing with you for control of the family. We cannot allow that. Get rid of her. Get rid of them both." Dominic stopped the recording. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold the device. "There is more," Tony said quietly. "We found transfer papers for a newborn male child. Lucas was supposed to be sold through a trafficking network Victor had connections with, but the buyer rejected him because he was premature and sickly, so they dumped him at Street Francis instead." Dominic looked up slowly. His eyes were red, but not from tears, from rage. "My son," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "was sold like merchandise. And when no one wanted him, they threw him away like garbage." Tony nodded grimly. "Victor has been running side operations the family council knows nothing about. Money laundering, human trafficking, weapons. He has been using the Castellano name to build his own empire in the shadows." Dominic stood abruptly, sending his chair crashing backward. "Call the family elders. Every single one of them. Emergency meeting tomorrow night at the main estate. What should I tell them? Tell them the future of the Castellano family depends on their attendance." Tony hesitated. "And Victor? What about him?" Dominic picked up his phone and dialed his brother's number. Victor answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and unsuspecting. "Dominic. What a pleasant surprise. Is everything all right?" "Brother," Dominic replied, his tone perfectly controlled. "We are having a family meeting tomorrow evening. There are important matters to discuss. Your presence is required. A pause on the other end. Of course, I would not miss it for the world. Dominic hung up without another word. Tomorrow, Victor would face judgment, and this time, there would be no escape. The grand hall of the Castellano estate had not seen a full family gathering in nearly a decade. Tonight, every seat at the long mahogany table was filled. The 7 elders of the family council sat in their designated places, their aged faces stern and watchful. Behind them stood their most trusted advisors, silent witnesses to whatever judgment would be passed. Victor sat at the right side of the table, his posture relaxed, his expression confident. Beside him, Elena maintained her usual cold elegance, her silver jewelry glinting under the chandelier light. Marcus Webb stood in the corner, clutching a briefcase, his eyes darting nervously around the room. The massive double doors swung open. Dominic entered first, his stride measured and deliberate. Behind him came a wheelchair pushed by Tony. In it sat Serena, pale and thin but with her head held high, and flanking her on either side walked 2 children with unmistakable blue eyes. The room fell into absolute silence. Victor's face drained of color. Elena's hand flew to her throat. Marcus took an involuntary step backward. The elders leaned forward, their eyes moving between the woman in the wheelchair and the children beside her. Whispers rippled through the room like wind through dead leaves. Impossible, one elder muttered. She died 8 years ago. Dominic stopped at the head of the table, positioning his family behind him like a shield. She did not die, he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. She was forced to disappear, threatened with my life if she ever returned. And the man responsible for all of it is sitting in this very room. He pulled out the folder Tony had prepared and dropped it onto the table with a heavy thud. Forged divorce papers with my signature, falsified death certificates, bank transfers to silence witnesses, medical records altered to hide the birth of my son. He pressed a button on his phone. Victor's recorded voice filled the hall. That woman knows too much about our money laundering operations. She has to disappear. Then Elena's voice followed. If she gives birth, there will be an heir competing with Victor. Get rid of them both. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. The eldest member of the council rose slowly, his weathered face twisted with fury. Is this true, Victor? Victor jumped to his feet, his mask of calm finally cracking. I did what I had to do for this family. That woman was a threat. Her father was an enemy of the Castellanos. Her blood should never have mixed with ours. Dominic's response was ice. She is my wife. These children carry my blood. They are Castellanos, whether you accept it or not. He turned to face the elders directly, his voice rising. Victor did not just betray me. He ran secret operations behind the council's back, money laundering, weapons dealing, and worst of all, he sold my newborn son to a child trafficking ring. Gasps echoed through the hall. Even the most hardened men at the table looked shaken. Victor's face contorted with panic. Lies, all lies. He is trying to silence. Dominic's command thundered through the room. By the laws of this family, betraying blood is unforgivable. Trafficking children is punishable by death. Victor and Elena have committed both. He paused, letting his words sink into every corner of the hall. There is only one sentence for such crimes. The eldest council member raised his hand, calling for order. The room fell silent as the 7 elders exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless language of men who had spent decades making life and death decisions together. One by one, they cast their votes. Guilty, 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 unanimous. The eldest elder rose, his voice heavy with finality. Victor Castellano, you are hereby stripped of all titles, assets, and authority within this family. You are exiled from the Castellano bloodline, your name erased from our records. You no longer exist to us. He turned to Elena, his gaze equally cold. Elena Castellano, you conspired to murder a pregnant woman and traffic an innocent child. You are banished from this estate and forbidden from ever contacting any member of this family again. Finally, his eyes settled on Marcus Webb, who stood trembling in the corner. As for you, Mr. Webb, you will answer for your crimes according to our laws. 2 guards stepped forward and seized Marcus by the arms. He did not resist. He knew what awaited him. Everyone in that room knew, though no one would ever speak of it. Another guard brought Catherine forward. She had been caught trying to flee the city that afternoon, her bags packed with jewelry and cash. Now she stood before the council, mascara running down her face, all pretense of elegance gone. This woman provided information to Victor in exchange for his protection, Tony reported. She hoped to replace Serena permanently. The eldest elder dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Remove her. She is nothing to us. Catherine was dragged away, screaming protests that no one bothered to acknowledge. Dominic stepped forward, his voice clear and strong. Before this council, I declare Serena my lawful wife, never divorced, never deceased. I declare Lily and Lucas my legitimate children, heirs to my name and my legacy. The elders nodded their approval. Several rose to offer congratulations, their earlier suspicion replaced by respect. Victor, still held by 2 guards, suddenly lunged forward with a roar of fury. "You will regret this!" he screamed, his face twisted with madness. "That woman will destroy everything." "She will." A guard struck him across the face, silencing him instantly. Dominic walked slowly toward his fallen brother, looking down at him with eyes devoid of any remaining affection. "You are the one who destroyed everything. Victor, you tried to kill my wife. You sold my son. You stole 8 years of my life. And now, you have paid the price." He turned his back. "Take them away. I never want to see their faces again." Victor and Elena were dragged into the night. No one asked where they were being taken. No one wanted to know. The hall erupted in murmurs of relief and congratulations. Elders approached Dominic to shake his hand. Servants brought champagne. For the first time in 8 years, it seemed the nightmare was finally over. Then Serena coughed. It was a small sound at first, lost in the noise of celebration. But it grew worse, harsher, more violent. Blood splattered onto her white dress. Her body convulsed, and then she collapsed sideways in her wheelchair, unconscious. "Serena!" Dominic caught her before she hit the floor, her blood staining his hands. The doctor who had accompanied them rushed forward, checking her pulse, her breathing. "Her heart is failing," he said urgently. The stress was too much. "We need to get her to surgery immediately, or she will not survive the night." The ambulance screamed through the Chicago streets, its sirens cutting through the night air. Inside, Dominic held Serena's limp hand while paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her failing heart. Her face had turned ashen, her breathing shallow and irregular, each gasp seeming weaker than the last. At the hospital, doctors rushed her straight into the emergency wing. Dominic tried to follow but was stopped at the double doors by a nurse. "You cannot go in there, sir. Please wait here." Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the lead surgeon emerged, his face grave beneath his mask. "Mr. Castellano, your wife needs emergency heart surgery. Years of malnutrition and stress have severely damaged her cardiac system. Without immediate intervention, she will not survive." "Then do it," Dominic said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs." The surgeon hesitated. "You need to understand the risks. Her body is extremely weak. The surgery itself could kill her. Our success rate in cases like this is approximately 30%. 30%. Less than 1 in 3. Dominic closed his eyes, absorbing the blow. "Do it." In the hallway outside the surgical wing, Lily and Luke sat side by side on a cold metal bench, their small bodies pressed close together, their hands intertwined. 2 children who had only just found each other, now facing the possibility of losing the mother who connected them. "Mommy is strong," Lily whispered, her voice trembling but determined. "She survived so many bad things. She will not leave us now. She promised she would never leave me." Luke said nothing. His jaw was clenched tight, his blue eyes fixed on the floor. He had only known his mother for a few days. He had only just begun to understand what it meant to be loved. The thought of losing her before he could truly have her was too cruel to comprehend. A nurse approached Dominic. "Sir, she is asking for you. We can give you 2 minutes before we take her in." He pushed through the doors and found Serena on a gurney, surrounded by machines and monitors. Tubes ran from her arms. Wires connected her chest to beeping screens. But when she saw him, she smiled. "Dominic," she breathed. He took her hand, pressing it against his lips. "If I do not make it," she began. "Do not say that. Listen to me." Her grip tightened with what little strength she had. "If I do not wake up, promise me you will take care of them. Both of them. They need you. They need a father." Tears streamed down Dominic's face, the second time he had cried in as many weeks. "You are going to take care of them yourself," he said fiercely. "You are going to wake up. And we are going to be a family. You did not survive 8 years of hell just to give up now." Serena smiled weakly, her fingers brushing his cheek. "I waited 8 years for you. And now, finally, I am home." The nurses came to wheel her away. Dominic held her hand until the very last second, until the surgical doors swung shut between them. He stood alone in the empty corridor, staring at those doors, willing them to open again with good news. Outside in the hallway, A soft melody began to play. Lily had taken out her violin. She stood in the middle of the waiting area, her small figure bathed in harsh fluorescent light, and began to play Ave Maria. The notes rose into the air like a prayer, filling the sterile hospital with something sacred. Luke sat nearby, watching his sister play for the first time. Tears he did not know he was capable of shedding rolled silently down his cheeks. Above them, the red light of the operating room remained lit. 5 hours passed, then 6, then 7. Dominic did not move from his spot outside the surgical wing. He stood like a statue, his eyes fixed on the red light above the operating room doors, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Tony brought him coffee that grew cold untouched. Nurses offered him a chair that he refused to use. In the waiting area, Lily played her violin until her fingers cramped and her arms ached. She played every song her mother had ever taught her, one after another, filling the hospital corridors with music that seemed to hold back the darkness. When she finally could not lift the bow anymore, Luke took the instrument from her hands and set it gently aside. Then he wrapped his arm around his sister, and they leaned against each other, two small figures keeping vigil through the endless night. At 3:17 in the morning, the red light finally went dark. Dominic's heart stopped. He turned toward the doors, not daring to breathe. The surgeon emerged slowly, his scrubs stained with sweat, his mask pulled down around his neck. He looked exhausted, drained, but as he approached Dominic, something remarkable happened. He smiled. "The surgery was successful," he said. "She is stable. Her heart is functioning normally. She is going to live." Dominic heard the words, but for a moment they did not register. Then they hit him all at once, and his legs buckled. He collapsed into the nearest chair, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs he could not control. The most powerful man in Chicago, the boss everyone feared, wept like a child in a hospital hallway. Across the room, Lily burst into tears. She threw her arms around Luke, clutching him desperately. "Mommy is okay," she cried. "She is okay. She did not leave us." Luke held her tightly, his own tears flowing freely for the first time since he could remember. For years he had believed he was incapable of crying, that the pain of his childhood had burned that ability out of him. But now, surrounded by family he had never known existed, he discovered he could feel after all. The days that followed were filled with quiet healing. Serena was moved to a private recovery suite, the best the hospital had to offer. Dominic rarely left her side, sleeping in a chair beside her bed, holding her hand through the long nights. Lily and Luke took turns reading to her, telling her stories, playing cards on her blanket. Lily began teaching Luke to play the violin. He proved to be a natural, his fingers finding the strings with surprising ease, as if the music had been waiting inside him all along. "You have talent," Lily told him seriously. "Mommy will be so happy when she hears you play." Serena watched them from her pillows, tears of joy sliding down her healing cheeks. Her children, together at last. Her family, whole for the first time. Dominic sat beside her, their fingers intertwined. "We will start over," he said softly. "From the beginning, a new life, a real family." 1 week later, Serena was strong enough to sit up on her own. Color had returned to her face. Her eyes, once hollow with suffering, now sparkled with hope. Dominic walked into her room that morning carrying a small velvet box. He approached her bed slowly, then lowered himself onto one knee. "8 years ago, I made you promises I could not keep," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I failed you. I let others tear us apart. But I will not fail you again." He opened the box, revealing a diamond ring that caught the morning light. "This time, I am asking you properly. Serena, will you marry me again? Will you let me spend the rest of my life making up for every moment we lost?" Serena looked at the ring, then at the man kneeling before her. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in 8 years, they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. 3 weeks later, the garden of the Castellano estate was transformed into a paradise of white roses and golden lanterns. It was a small ceremony, intimate and private. Only those who truly mattered were invited. The loyal elders who had stood with Dominic, the trusted staff who had served the family for decades, and a few friends who had proven their worth through the darkest times. Serena walked down the aisle on her own 2 feet, her steps slow but steady. She wore a simple white dress that flowed gently in the spring breeze, elegant in its simplicity. She was still thin, still recovering, but her eyes glowed with a light that had been extinguished for 8 long years. Beside the altar stood Lily, her small body draped in a pink dress, her violin tucked under her chin, and next to her stood Luke, wearing his first suit, tugging awkwardly at his collar but unable to stop smiling. As Serena reached the halfway point of the aisle, Lily began to play. The notes of Ave Maria rose into the afternoon air, pure and clear, carrying with them the weight of everything this family had endured. It was the same song that had stopped Dominic on that crowded street corner, the same melody that had haunted their wedding 8 years ago. But now, played by their daughter in the garden of their home, it meant something entirely different. It meant survival. It meant reunion. It meant hope. Dominic watched his wife approach, his heart so full he thought it might burst. When she finally stood before him, he took her hands in his and made no effort to hide the tears streaming down his face. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. Vows were exchanged, promises renewed, and when it came time for the rings, Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out something else as well. The heart-shaped necklace. He placed it gently around Serena's neck, where it had belonged all those years ago. "This kept you alive," he said softly. "It brought you back to me." Serena smiled, then turned to Lily. She unclasped the necklace and fastened it around her daughter's neck instead. "Now it belongs to you," she said, "as a reminder of what our family survived, and as a promise that we will never be separated again." Lily touched the silver heart with trembling fingers, her eyes shining. Then Luke stepped forward. He had been quiet throughout the ceremony, watching everything with wide eyes. But now he spoke, his voice small but clear. "I have a family now," he said simply. "I did not know what that meant before. Now I do." Dominic pulled all 3 of them into his arms, holding them tightly against his chest. His wife, his daughter, his son, finally together. From the crowd, Tony raised his glass. "The boss has finally found his weakness," he announced with a grin. "But I have to say, it is the most beautiful weakness I have ever seen." Laughter rippled through the guests. Glasses clinked, music played, and as the sun set over the Castellano garden, Serena leaned close to Dominic and whispered in his ear. "Thank you for not giving up on us." He kissed her forehead, holding her tighter. "Never again," he promised. "Never again." 1 year had passed since that fateful night, when a violin's melody had stopped Dominic Castellano in his tracks on a crowded Chicago street. The Castellano family now lived in a new estate on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling property filled with gardens and sunlight, chosen specifically because it held no memories of the darkness that had come before. Laughter echoed through its halls daily, a sound that had been absent from Dominic's life for far too long. Lily and Luke attended the finest school in Chicago, arriving each morning in matching uniforms, their blue eyes bright with the wonder of children who had finally discovered what normal life could be. They had friends now, real friends who invited them to birthday parties and playdates. Luke had become fiercely protective of his twin sister, walking her to every class, glaring at anyone who looked at her wrong. And Lily, in turn, spent every afternoon teaching him to play the violin, delighting in his natural talent. Serena had made a complete recovery. Her cheeks had filled out, her hair had regained its shine, and her smile, once so rare, now appeared constantly. She had opened a small music school in the community center, offering free violin lessons to children from struggling families. Every student who walked through her door reminded her of Lily, of the little girl who had played on street corners for coins just to survive. Dominic remained the head of the Castellano family, but his focus had shifted. The illegal operations were slowly being phased out, replaced by legitimate businesses that served the community rather than exploiting it. He had established a charitable foundation called Lily's Hope, dedicated to helping abandoned women and children find safety and support. In its first year alone, the foundation had assisted over 300 families in escaping situations of abuse and poverty. On a crisp autumn evening, the Chicago Grand Theater was filled to capacity. The occasion was a charity concert benefiting underprivileged youth music programs, and the headline performer was an 8-year-old violin prodigy named Lily Castellano. Dominic sat in the front row, Serena beside him clutching his hand. Luke sat on her other side, wearing a suit that matched his father's, his eyes fixed on the stage. And next to Luke sat Mrs. Rosa Martinez, the elderly neighbor who had helped Serena and Lily survive their darkest years, now an honorary grandmother to the twins. The lights dimmed. The audience fell silent. Lily walked onto the stage alone, her violin tucked under her arm, her pink dress flowing behind her. She looked so small under the bright spotlights, yet she carried herself with a confidence that belied her age. She raised her violin, positioned her bow, and began to play. Ave Maria filled the Grand Theater, each note pure and resonant, carrying the weight of everything this family had endured. It was the same song that had drawn Dominic to her on that street corner, the same melody that had played at her parents' wedding, twice now. the same tune that had served as a prayer during Serena's surgery. But tonight, it was something more. It was a declaration of triumph, a celebration of survival, a testament to love that had refused to die. When the final note faded into silence, the audience erupted. People rose to their feet, applauding thunderously, wiping tears from their eyes. But Lily did not look at them. Her gaze found her family in the front row, and she smiled. Backstage, after the performance, Serena pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "You have come so far," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "From that cold street corner to this beautiful stage. I am so proud of you, my darling." Dominic wrapped his arms around all three of them, his wife and his children, holding them as if he would never let go. "Thank you," he said to Lily, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for playing on that street corner. Thank you for asking me that question. You brought our family back together." Lee looked up at him with those striking blue eyes. "Mommy always told me that if I played long enough, you would hear me," she said simply, "and you did." That night, long after the theater had emptied and the city had gone to sleep, the sound of a violin drifted through the windows of the Castellano estate. Lily stood in the garden, playing under the stars, her brother beside her learning the notes, her parents watching from the porch with their arms around each other. It was no longer the desperate melody of a starving child begging for coins on a dark street corner. It was the song of hope, of love, of a family that had been broken and scattered but had found its way back together against all odds. True family is not just about blood. It is about the people who are willing to fight for you, to search for you, to never give up on you no matter how many years pass or how impossible the odds seem. The truth can be buried, hidden, and denied, but it can never be destroyed. Sooner or later, it always finds its way to the surface. And love, real love, will wait. It will endure. It will survive every obstacle and every betrayal, because in the end, love always finds its way home. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story. Share it with your family and friends who might need to hear this message today. We would love to hear from you. Have you ever lost something precious because you believed the wrong people? What would you have done in Dominic's place? What part of this story moved you the most? Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts with us. Your words mean more than you know. Thank you for watching and for being part of our community. We wish you and your loved ones good health, happiness, and peace in your lives every single day. Cherish the people around you, for family is the most precious gift we can ever receive. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next story. Take care and much love to you all.